My name's Lorelei Jones. I'm an anthropologist. My research is on organisations and professions, and in this session I'm going to be talking about research interviews. You might think of interviews as conversations with a purpose. In this case, the purpose is to generate data that you can use to answer your research question. As you typically want to explore an issue in some depth, you would normally allow about 45 minutes per interview. So an hour in total would be needed to leave time for introductions, perhaps a cup of coffee, and to go through other formalities, including asking permission to audio record the interview, which I would recommend, as otherwise you'll be busy trying to scribble down everything they say, which may detract from the conversational element. It is important to establish rapport, as you want the interviewee to talk quite openly about their world of work or their use of health services, and their everyday experience in relation to the topic you're interested in. It is good practice to allow the interviewee to talk. Try not to interrupt, unless the conversation is repeatedly going off topic. Remember, their words, and not yours, are the data that you will go on to analyse later. Equally, it is important to follow up on any key points the interviewee might have said during the interview. When reading back the transcript of the interview afterwards, you may find it frustrating if the interviewee had said something that you now recognise as important, but did not follow up on at the time. Interviews are a useful way of collecting qualitative data because they allow you to obtain people's views relatively quickly, but you need to ensure that a range of stakeholder viewpoints are represented. Returning to the example of medication safety, you may want to include pharmacists, doctors and nurses, as well as middle and senior managers, as all are likely to see interventions in this area differently. Interviewees are often time poor, so you may not get as long as you'd hoped for when preparing for the interview. So you need to prioritise your questions accordingly. The time and cost of transcribing interviews is relatively high. Transcribing a minute of speech professionally will cost £1 or more, so you would need to allow £60 to £80 per interview. If you plan to record the interview, you should ask the interviewee's permission. It's good practice to produce an information sheet for the interviewee to read before the interview, and for them to complete a consent form. The conversation is normally structured using a topic guide, a list of questions you'd like to ask them. Here is an abridged version of a topic guide created a few years ago for a study investigating the role of private and third sector providers in the delivery of NHS care. There are 3 main parts to a topic guide: an introduction, the topics for discussion, and a procedure for the conclusion of the interview. The first, general information, is a reminder to write down background information about the interviewee, including their job title, time in the organisation, time in the particular role, and perhaps their previous role. It is good to include this general section to put everyone at ease by starting with some relatively easy questions. Then within each broad topic area, you would want to create a set of questions to ask the interviewee. You really have to play it by ear, using the topic guide to steer the conversation towards what you are interested in, but also paying attention to what the interviewee says, and responding to that, or probing further, so that it becomes a fruitful conversation, and not merely running through a predetermined script. And don't expect to cover every single question. It should be seen more as a guide for your conversation. The end of the interview is a good opportunity to request further information you might want while the person is there, such as documentary sources or access to routine data that may help with your evaluation. Normally in a study we intend to publish, we would agree to anonymise fully any quotations we use from an interview in future publications. For your evaluation, you should at least talk through with the interviewee how you intend to store and use their data for your evaluation, and of course thank them for helping you. Concludes this session on research interviews.